Virgil, thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, well, since it's a federal holiday, that means you probably don't have to be in court this morning, so that's why you picked this day.
Maybe.
Maybe. Tell us about how you grew up and where you grew up, and in particular whether that had any effect on your decision to become a lawyer or what kind of lawyer to be, anything like that.
Sure. First of all, let me say good morning to everyone again, and I had a little bit of flashback when I walked in here because I took real properties in this class.
Which is why you became a trial lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. But I grew up single mom, strong grandmother, aunt, so grew up basically falling out in the house. Modest at that point, what we would probably call a poor background here, but a lot of support in the family. Education was stressed. Go to school, get a good education. One day you'll be able to work where you want to work, live where you want to live, that sort of thing. So that's pretty much what I did. Grew up, I was born not too far from here, actually. Right down the street on Riverside Drive, there's a Waffle House. And it's a Crystal. There were about 4 or 5 houses between the Crystal and I was set right where the Waffle House is. And lived there until I was in the 6th grade, and then we moved over to Mercer on Plant Street. And I used to walk to high school at Central through Mercer's campus. And just in those days, school and athletics was what we did. And I grew up generally just I thought was a good life. And when I decided to go to law school, and I reflected back on my experiences, and I always grew up. I was taught to be respectful for people and to treat everyone the same, and to not put myself above anyone, but always remember where I came from. So those are the kinds of things that have stuck with me throughout the years. Originally I wanted to be a baseball player. That's all I wanted to do. And then in high school something happened that sort of changed all that. But that's
like the curveball, is it?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, when I was at Central High School, I had a class, they called it business law or something like that. But our professor, our teacher, took us down on field trips. I don't know what they call them now. They may call them experiences now, but we call them field trips. But she took us down to the courthouse, and we sat in on a trial. And it was a criminal trial. They were trying a guy who had been named the barefoot rapist. He would go in houses in South Macon, he'd take his shoes off, leave them outside the window. And I just became fascinated sitting in the courtroom. And from that point on, that's when I decided I wanted to be. Still like baseball, but I wanted to be a lawyer.
All right. Well, why Mercer Law?
I've never been one to want to go too far from home. I always wanted to come back to Macon and try to make a difference here. And just having grown up around Mercer, going through, walking through the campus, going to high school. I remember in high school, the law school at that time was over on the main campus. And I remember our class, the same professor, took us over to Mercer, and they were having a moot. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was a trial, but I since learned that it was a moot court argument, and sat in on that. And again, Mercer just sort of became ingrained in my mind. And as I said, I wanted to always come back home, so I only applied to one law school, and luckily I got in Mercer.
Now, did you start law school in the Riles building and then move over here, or were they already over here?
No, we started in the Riles building. My class was the first class in this building, and we came over. We were on a quarter system then, so we came over in January.
Well, what are your memories of law school, both fond and maybe not so fond? When you think back on law school, what do you think about other than real property in this room?
Oh man, I remember I remember the summer before law school, I worked at Sears out at the mall. It's obviously not the mall on Riverside now, but the one that's out on Eisenhower. And I worked in customer service, and man, I learned how to wrap gifts, and except the big boxes, I could wrap one end, but that end that I couldn't wrap, it went in the bag first. But I remember working that summer, to have money for books and that sort of thing. And I remember coming over like a week before. We had a list of books that we were supposed to get, and one guy who was a third-year student, who's a lawyer now, Malcolm Lindley, he had an off-campus bookstore, and he sold his books a little bit cheaper than they did on campus. And I remember going in there, and I had work to pay for my books, and that was a guy who was going to be in my first year class. I can't remember his name now, but I remember him pulling out 6 blank checks that his dad had given him for books, and he was just sort of buying one of everything, all kinds of supplements. And he stayed in law school about 30 days, and he just went home. And that always stuck with me. And then the other thing that stuck with me, I took the contracts class one Friday afternoon from Dick Creswell. I think he still teaches some over here.
Oh, yes.
He taught contracts. And we'd have the assignments about briefing so many cases. He'd say brief cases on first 25 pages. Okay. I remember at the bottom of the 25th page, it was just the case name. I'll never forget this. Eleanor versus Thomas. So I briefed all the cases. For that case, it was just the title of the case at the bottom of the page. So I didn't think that one counted. And you know what happened. Last person to get called on in the class. Mr. Adams, give us Eleanor versus Thomas. God. And I had to say those dreaded words. Sorry, I didn't brief that. Man, I felt like if there's a trap door here. So I remember going up to him after class and said, look, I did everything but that. I'm sorry. He said, oh, no problem. Never forgot that. Never forgot that.
That's a good lesson. You've obviously been practicing law a long time now. Looking back on your legal education, what did it prepare you for, and what did it not prepare you for?
Well, let me start with what it did not prepare me for. It did not prepare me for the business of practicing law. A huge eye-opener for me is just, if I could practice law all the time and not worry about the business, that'd be great. But a huge eye-opener was just, you're running a business. What's this thing called payroll tax? Huh? What's that? So it did not prepare me for the day-to-day things that you have to deal with in practicing law. And I think this has changed now, but at least then it didn't help me as much with the practical aspects. Where's the clerk's office? How do I go file this? Just those kinds of things. I think that's changed a lot now. What it did help me with, though, is it definitely taught me how to think like a lawyer, how to analyze a situation, how to deal with people in a lot of different circumstances. And it taught me confidence, too. I was involved in moot court, and those kinds of experiences, really went with me and helped me become, the lawyer that I am.
Do I remember right, your first job out of law school was at the DA's office?
Yes. I had a good friend of mine who I later practiced law with, who's now a United States District Court judge at Senior Status Judge Louis Sands. He was working in the DA's office here as a prosecutor. And I asked him, I said, hey, can I just come and volunteer? I was working a summer job over on the main campus and had some spare time, so I went down and volunteered. And then the next year, they hired me as a law student. And then I got to try a couple of cases as a law student. And then the following year, they created a position for me as assistant DA.
And how long did you do that?
7.5 years.
Tell us about that time in your career. I mean, what kinds of cases did you handle, and what appealed to you about that kind of work?
Well, what appealed to me was just being in the courtroom, because that was my idea of being an attorney. That's what fascinated me when I was in high school. So just being in the courtroom all the time is really, really what interested me. I tried all kinds of cases: shoplifting, burglary, armed robbery, all the way up to murder. Actually, the last death penalty in Bibb County was a case that I handled. What was that case? It was Patillo versus, it was on the field, Keith Patillo. One of those cases you always remember, not just because he got death penalty, but because it was just so horrendous. Keith Patillo killed a young lady who had just graduated from high school at Mount Sales, Stephanie McLam. And she and her girlfriend met him down in Central City Park one Friday afternoon. So they agreed to go out on a date, all three of them. He didn't have a car, so they went by and picked him up. They rode around, that night, dropped the girlfriend home, and then they wound up back down below Central City Park. And she didn't come home that night. Next morning, an elderly gentleman was down in that area. This is like some streets behind the ball field down there. And he had a field down there where he planted okra, and he noticed a body over there. And so they, it was Stephanie McLam. Keith Patillo had beaten her to death with a Louisville Slugger baseball bat. And it was so bad, and the kid assaulted her too, but it was so bad that I remember, like, this fingertip was off her. Found it several feet away, and what she did, she warding off the blows, and the bat hitting against the skull just sort of shattered her finger. But I remember that case, and there's video around there somewhere that rears its head sometimes of the closing argument in that case, and I remember, I had the baseball bat in my hand, and I just couldn't believe what he had done, and I was looking at him, and in the back of my mind, something did say hit him with the baseball bat. But I wasn't going to do that, and I had a pointer, and I hit the pointer, and it flew over the room. And on appeal, one part of the decision was bombastic argument is not unconstitutional. So
you were Mr. Bombastic.
Yeah, for that. But that case sticks out, and what was tough about that is when you run into situations like that, and then it was also tough when there were young people who were coming up and had committed crimes and had their whole futures there. You try to talk to them and hopefully steer them away from that. What was rewarding though is when you had victims that you were able to help.
Well, as a prosecutor, you started out as a junior prosecutor, but you were there all the time. You had a lot of discretion, right, about
right.
how you dealt with particular defendants. I didn't tell you I was going to ask this, and I hope you don't mind, but what guides that discretion for a good prosecutor? Prosecutor can decide whether to charge, what to charge. What guides that discretion?
Well, I think maybe a couple things. First and foremost, you just do what's right. You can't go wrong if you do what's right. And I think you got to have some compassion too, and that compassion flows both ways, for the victim, but also sometimes for the person that's being charged. But basically, do what's right. I remember one thing that I used to see a lot, especially with young black males. You know, we have what's called first offender treatment. That, you know, when a person pleads guilty, they've never been convicted of a felony before, and if they get probation and complete the probation successfully, then they will not have a criminal record. Okay, so there's no adjudication of guilt. The adjudication of guilt is withheld to see if they're going to complete probation. The downside of that is if they don't, they can be resentenced to the maximum. I used to see a lot of attorneys who didn't look like me representing young black males, and they would not advise them of first offender. Now, granted, that didn't work for everybody, you know. But you know, there were a lot of these kids I was seeing that weren't being told about. So what I started doing was we go in front of the judge and I said, your lawyer did tell you about first offender, right? And sometimes they'd say, huh? And I put it out there, so at least they had the opportunity to know about it. But you know, I used to tell people that being a prosecutor, that's a good position to be in. That's a position that you need to have a lot of diversity in, because you impact people's lives on both sides. But it's all about being fair and doing the right thing. So I think if you follow that, for exercising the discretion of the prosecutor, it's not that big a deal.
Well, what was the hardest thing about being a prosecutor, or the least pleasant thing? I know you love being in trial. What was the downside?
Seeing the young people, you know, sometimes, you know, just come back, and then you might see, you know, you stay there a while and you see this person, then you come back around, and that person's son, and it's, you know, that sort of was the hardest thing, you know, for me, just to deal with that and trying to get people turned around so they can see that there's a better way. But that was what was hardest.
Let me go back to your death penalty case for just a minute again. A couple of things I'm going to ask you I didn't warn you about, and if you don't want to answer them. You mentioned in the closing argument, you know, you had that. There had to be emotion involved for you in trying something like that, because you're human. How do you control that or channel it into doing your job as a lawyer, as opposed to just succumbing to, you know, very understandable rage?
Yeah, and that's why I said, you know, in that thought was I wasn't going to do that, but you know, you get wound up in it, and then you know, you also get wound up in the fact too that although this guy had done something horrendous, by the same token, you're standing in front of a jury. I mean, can you imagine standing in front of a jury and you're asking them to sentence this man to death? I mean, that's pretty strong on the other side. But I just always, again, thought about doing what I believe was right and doing my job, representing the people of the state. And in my mind, there are certain things, certain crimes that are so bad that you ought to get the maximum sentence for. Now, that needs to be done in a fair way. And I wouldn't do anything, you know, unfair at all. But my job was to put the facts in front of the jury and to give this person a fair opportunity. Put it all in front of the jury and let those 12 people on the jury decide. And whatever their decision was, I could live with it. So the way I looked at it was, I'm putting the facts out there in front of the jury. I'm not going to do anything underhanded. I'm going to make sure you get a fair trial, and then we live with the jury's decision.
Was your defendant in that case eventually executed?
No, he wasn't. After I left and went into private practice, there were some cases that came down that talked about retardation and defendant.
It's an old term for it, and
Yeah.
now, I mean,
Yeah.
that sounds antiquated, but that's what the cases used to
That's what
describe
the
it.
cases, yeah, that's what they used to describe it. And you know, there was this notion about that was never tested and that sort of thing. And the DA at the time, I mean, this guy, he didn't fall in that category, but I think the DA at the time just said, okay, we'll have to go through all these appeals dealing with that issue, so let's let him plead to consecutive life sentences without parole, and they did. They made that decision.
Well, the time came that you left the DA's office and went into private practice. What drove this decision?
Well, I always wanted to go into private practice, and this was really the year after I tried the Patillo case, and I had tried every kind of case you can think of. You know, that case, tried a case against a pastor of a large, predominantly white church here who was taking money from the church and doing some other things in the church. So I'd done everything I thought I could do, and I thought I was ready to go into private practice. And a friend of mine who was 2 years ahead of me in law school, Charles Mathis, who's now deceased, he had already been practicing in Milledgeville with one of my current partners right now, Jimmy Jordan. And Judge Sands and I decided that, okay, it's a good time. I was in the DA's office, he was in the U.S. Attorney's office. And we thought it was a good time to open an office here.
Okay. And you opened that office to do what kind of work? What at first, what were you doing? I know what you do now. What were you doing then? Pretty
much whatever anybody asked me to do. So, you know, we tried to do primarily plaintiff's personal injury, but when you go out, you know, again, we get back to this whole business thing. You know, you want to help people and you want to practice law, but you want to eat too. So, and I had been a prosecutor, so naturally, criminal cases, you know, came. So I did criminal cases, did some personal injury work, and I even did 2 divorces. The first case, God, never do that again. The first case I ever tried as a private practitioner was a divorce case, and it's one of those cases I remember too. I represented this guy, and he came on one day, and his wife just sort of said, "Hey, I'm tired. I want to go another direction." And this guy had built a house. He worked for the city. I mean, just a big, real nice guy. And I remember the Friday before the Monday that the trial was going to start, we were prepared and we just finished, and he stood up and he just started crying like a baby. And I said, never again. I will not do this again. But I actually had one other divorce case before him, but it didn't settle. But this one, that's the first trial, and I said, I can't do this.
What's appealing or rewarding to you about private practice versus working in the public sector?
I think you get more personal contact with people, and you really feel like, you know, this person that you're representing, they have a face, you get to know them, you know, you're around them for a while. The case lasts longer than in a criminal setting, so you develop a relationship, and you become an advocate for that person. You know, when you're in the DA's office, there's a victim out there, but sometimes, you know, it could be a store, it could be you know, maybe a person whose house has been broken into. That's a person, you know, a real live person. But in a civil case, you know, this is a person that's come to you and said, I have this problem. And you represent that person and you're advocating for them. So it's more of a close relationship. It's a lot more riding on it because it's you. You know, when you work as an assistant DA, you know, if you lose a case, okay, you go back to work and you pick up another case. I mean, that's what you do. But when you're in private practice, you know, you're representing this person that's looking to you to represent them and to handle the case successfully. And then you want to hopefully do a good job so other people come to you as well.
I want to jump ahead just a little bit. There's a reason for this. I want you to describe for the students what your practice is like today. And then my question is going to be, how did you get from the start to the highly successful practice you run today?
Today, our practice is primarily plaintiff's personal injury. With a little bit of twist, we also have a governmental practice. I served as a county attorney here before consolidation, so we still do litigation for the county. But primarily, we are a plaintiff's personal injury firm, litigation firm. We handle a lot of medical negligence cases, products liability, auto accidents where people have been seriously injured. That's primarily, what we do.
And, not a secret, it's a highly successful practice. And how did you get from this poor man weeping about his divorce to the highly sophisticated, highly successful practice that you have today? What do you do to kind of make it grow like that?
Well, I think what you have to do is don't stay in the four corners of your office. You got to get out and get involved in the community and give back. Not necessarily just to grow business, but to be involved, to let people see you out there and know that you care about the community, you're active, you relate to people, and also that you do a good job with the people who do come to see you, and you build a good reputation, because after all, that's really what we have at the end of the day is our reputation. But I think what helped me too to grow the practice was to start off in a DA's office and to get the experience trying cases, and you get some notoriety trying cases, and I would take cases that maybe nobody else wanted to take, because if I lost it, nobody else wanted to take it, and they didn't see anything in it anyway. But if I didn't, then that's a case that helped build my reputation. So, the way I grew the practice was to do that, to get involved in the community, and then, to try to do a good job for people, and then they would hopefully tell others.
Let me ask you a hard question, and that is, starting in law school or before, and through your time in the DA's office and your time practicing law, do you feel like that other lawyers or judges or clients have ever treated you differently because of your race?
To be honest, not so much. I haven't seen that overtly. I think there was one time when I was in the DA's office, pretty much starting out, and back then was still now. This circuit is made up of Bibb, Peach, and Crawford County. And I remember we had one of the assistants pretty much stayed down in Peach County, and he handled that. But we would rotate on going down to help him. And when you went down there, it was pretty much, you walk in there and you might just have to pick up a file and go meet somebody that you've never seen before, you don't know anything about the case. And I remember, walking in there, to help him one day, and he kind of didn't have anything ready, so the judge called the case. I picked up the file and didn't have all the witnesses there. And then, the judge just reamed me out. And I'm thinking, man, I just got here, none of this is on me. And then he came up, next case, witnesses weren't there. And the judge was real apologetic with him. I'm saying, wait a minute, something about that's not right. Could that have been race? Yeah, could have been. Could have been I was a new guy, okay? But, and that judge, who's no longer with us now, but he would ride me. I mean, man, he would ride me until I tried a case in front of him. And it was a case where a probation officer was taking bribes from his probationer. And I tried that case against the ex-district attorney. And the ex-district attorney came up short. And I never had any problems with that judge again. As a matter of fact, he became a real fan of mine, and he would talk to me, even talk to me about becoming a judge. I mean, he really became, sort of like an advisor in a sense. But it was, the way I look at it, more paying my dues, okay? And I don't have a problem with that.
You know, I've asked that question of Tamika Daniel, and asked it of Judge Sands, I asked it of Judge Coleman. And I want to ask it of you in just this way. If a young black attorney did encounter what appeared to be, may in fact be, disparate treatment because of their race, how would you advise that young lawyer to handle such a situation?
Well, I think it depends on the situation, because you got to keep in mind that first and foremost, you got to do what's best for your client. You got to represent your client. So, yeah, you can go off on the one hand, and if it's a judge, you start hollering racism and stuff. I mean, you can do that, but you got to make damn sure that works. And your client's not going to be adversely impacted. But maybe another way to do that is kind of the way I did it. You show the judge that, look, I'm not going anywhere, I'm not backing down. You stand your ground, but you do it professionally, you do it the way it's supposed to be done, and you vigorously represent your client. And I think that's the way you fight back at that. You just do your job, and you just show him or her that I'm as good or better than anybody else in this courtroom. I'm not backing down from you. And at the end of the day, I think judges respect that when you don't back down from them. But you got to do it in a professional way, and you got to do it by being prepared, even more than the judge. Being prepared. But that's the way you get back at it. That's the way you get back at it. The easy way is to scream, you just doing that because I'm black. And maybe at some point, maybe there's a time and place for that. But I'd like to think that the way you do it is showing them that you're better than they think you are. And you know more about the case than they do.
You mentioned Judge Sands, and one of the things we talk about in this class with some frequency is the importance of finding a mentor as a young lawyer. And I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about your mentors and what they did for you, how that works. And then I know you have mentored a number of younger lawyers, and I want to ask you about that role as well. So as a young lawyer, tell us about who your mentors were and how they helped you develop.
Well, Judge Sands was one. Obviously, we were good friends, and then, he'd gone through law school. He had sort of gone through some of the things that I had to go through. Manley Brown, who's an attorney here, and he was an adjunct professor here for a lot of years. Manley's been a mentor to a lot of attorneys, but I talked to him. Judge Walker Johnson, who's now deceased. He's not the judge that I was talking about earlier. But they have been mentors for me. And then people outside of the law. I think it's good to have people you can talk to who are not lawyers, because they give you a totally different perspective on how you handle situations and just on life, period.
Now, thinking about yourself as a mentor, that's time you're devoting to the development of a younger lawyer. And that's not putting money in your pocket, necessarily. Why do older lawyers mentor younger lawyers? There's a great tradition in the law of doing that. Why?
Well, I think you want to continue to see our profession flourish and have good advocates in our profession. So many times lawyers get a bad rap based on a few experiences. So I think it's important to teach younger lawyers the way the practice ought to be, how to be professional, and teach them how you handle situations so that they will have the respect, not just for the law, but they will have the respect for other lawyers, and that the public in general will have respect for our profession.
You mentioned early on that what you weren't prepared for was the business side. Well, your name is on the door, and has been for a long time. How do you learn how to run a profitable law firm And you know, and what does it take to make sure that that you succeed?
Well, I think you learn from talking to people who've done it. You know, talking to the Manley Browns and other people who've gone through that and who are running successful practices and who are running successful businesses. And it takes paying attention to it every single day, hiring good people, people who are committed to the practice and see it as a team. You know, we talk all the time, the most important position in our law firm is the receptionist, because that's the one that people have the first contact with. And if the receptionist isn't a good one, you know, the client doesn't get past her. So I think it's hiring good people. It's doing what you say you're going to do, having integrity, making sure your reputation is what it ought to be.
In your time in private practice, have you encountered other lawyers who weren't models of professionalism?
Yeah, yeah.
Tell us about what that looks like and then how you've dealt with it.
It can be, sometimes it's a younger lawyer who maybe didn't have a mentor and who sort of thinks that the biggest whatever I can be, that's what's gonna make me the better lawyer. You know, to show, you know, how tough I can be. It's hard to get along with. And, you know, what I try to do in that situation is just say, hey, come on, is this the way, you know, is this the way we want to go? You know, is this really what you want to do? I don't practice law like that. You know, that's not what this is about. So you don't have anything to prove to me. But if you want to go that route, okay, if you want to do that, okay, fine. But that's really not who I am. And we don't really need to handle this case that way. And a lot of times it works. Sometimes, you know, you deal with people that's just who they are, and they're going to be that way. So you know that going in. But I try not to get pulled down, you know, to that level. I still try to represent my client, do what I think is right. I don't go out of my way necessarily to make things easier, but I don't try to make things harder either. But I try to stay professional and to be civil. I'm going to always be civil, pretty much. You know, you run into the attorney sometimes, you know, on the phone and, you know, start screaming. And, you know, that's easy. Hang up the phone. But, you know, luckily I don't see it as much as, you know, sort of I used to. I think it's getting better.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because that's part of professionalism.
Yeah.
Is that kind of civility. Let me ask you about again focusing on your time in private practice. Is there one case or a couple of cases that you would point to as something you're most proud of, or that was most noteworthy in your career, most memorable for some reason?
Yeah, I'll take one as an assistant DA and then one maybe a couple in private practice. The one as an assistant DA, I remember I was trying this guy for armed robbery, and it was before Judge Walker Johnson. And the victim was an elderly black gentleman who worked for the city sanitation department. And I remember this was mid-'80s, and we've been going through a drought. It had not rained here for like a month. And it was, you know how Macon can get, well, first you will know. About July or so, and it can be brutal, where it's, you know, almost 100 degrees every day. So with sanitation workers, it was so hot that they changed their hours. They would let them go in, they'd start like 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever, they'd knock off like 2 in the afternoon. So this guy and his buddy, they knocked off, and they were walking. The sanitation department was down Lower Poplar down that way. So they were walking back toward Macon because this guy lived in Twiggs County, and back then they had a bus that would bring them to Macon and then take them back 2 or 3 times a day. But they had not had a chance to eat their lunch. So they had sack lunch, and they just stopped off in a little alleyway, which is actually behind the old location of the Tubman Museum. And they were sitting there just eating lunch, and this guy came up, pulled a knife on this guy, and robbed him. He only had $3 in his pocket. So he pulled a knife, cut his pocket, took his $3, and ran. And police happened to be in the area. They saw the police, told him, and gave a description. And police saw this guy coming out of a package store downtown, which was right near there. So they arrested him. So we're in trial. This guy's charged with armed robbery. The guy's black, victim's black. So we're in there, and you know, you get to that point where you got the victim on the stand, and you go through all the questions, and the last thing you want to ask him is, now, Mr. So-and-so, now would you look around this courtroom and point out the guy that you said came up to you that day when you were in the alley? You know, you want to give all the facts when you do this. When you were in the alley, eating your lunch that you had not had a chance to eat with your friend, pulled that knife on you and took the only $3 that you had. And this guy sitting there, and he's sitting like this, jury's out there, I'm over here asking questions. And he said, yeah, I'll never forget it. I'm looking at him right now. I'm thinking, how can you be looking at him right now? And he pointed out a white guy on the back row of the jury with a beard. And I'm saying, golly, man, this case, dismissed. But I knew he didn't know, he just had no idea what he's doing. So I said, now, look around the courtroom. And then he looked at Judge Johnson, and I said, oh, no. I'm not embellishing this at all. And I said, now, certainly you don't mean this gentleman back here on the jury. I said, now, look around. And he looked. He said, oh, there he is right there. I said, well, how do you know that's him? He said, because he had a glass eye, and this guy did. And then we called a friend in there, and of course, he had no problem. He identified it. But I thought, man, that's a true story.
That's a bad moment.
Oh, God. Absolutely true story. Civil case, really two. About 2 years ago, maybe, yeah, about 2.5 years ago, there was an elderly black lady here who lived in a rented house. And the house kind of run down, but the landlord wanted to sell it and basically said 30 days, you got to be gone. And it was like middle of December. And a teacher who I was acquainted with knew the family and had worked with the family for years. And she just called me and said, look, is there anything you could do? This lady, she get ready to get put out in the dead of winter. And, went ahead and filed an answer and objection to the dispossessory, and kind of created enough stuff in there just to make it difficult. And we were able to work it out, so they gave her another 12 months lease until she could find another place. And that was, that's something I was, proud of. And another case, as a matter of fact, we'll be in the Court of Appeals. I was telling you earlier, we'll be in the Court of Appeals on Wednesday of this week on a case in 2016. We tried a case in Albany, Georgia, against the city of Albany. And what happened was in February of 2010, there's a 20-year-old young black guy from Florvilla, Georgia. Florvilla is Butts County. If you're going up I-75 north toward Atlanta, it'll be High Falls. You'll see the sign, High Falls State Park. between there and McDonald. Fort Villa is a little small town there. But he and his cousin went to spend the weekend with his aunt down in Dawson, Georgia. Dawson is about 26 miles from Albany. So they went down there on Friday, and they were supposed to come back that Saturday evening. But on Saturday, the aunt's income tax check came in. So, of course, when he cashed it and said, hey, y'all stay over, we're going to take everybody out to Albany. So she bought him some clothes, and that night they all loaded up in her SUVs, like 7 of them. And they went to Albany. They went to a nightclub there in Albany, and as soon as they got there, there was a fight that started, so they left. I mean, they weren't involved in it, but they left. And somebody in the vehicle said, hey, I heard about this place over in East Albany called Brick City. Let's go over there. No one had ever been there. And this young man, it was his first time being in Albany, period. So they all went over to this place. Well, after they'd been there about 20 minutes or so, this kid, he was on the, this young man, he was on the dance floor. And two guys came up and approached him who later found out were gang members. This place was a haven for gang members. It was run by one gang, and another gang provided security there. And they came up and approached him and attacked him and started beating him. And about 15 or 20 people started beating him. The other gang that provided security came and got him, put him on the stage. They were still beating him. They then took him outside. And when they took him outside, some of the people had already made it outside. And they were just beating and jumping off cars, just beating this young man. And at some point they stopped. And his aunt's boyfriend came up to him outside and said, yeah, you okay? He said, yeah, I'm fine. And he said, then all of a sudden his eyes just sort of bucked because he was looking toward the road. And what he saw was one of these gang members coming up to him with a gun, and this guy shot him 7 times, killed him right there in the parking lot. So, this was a place called Brick City that did not have a license to operate as a nightclub. They were licensed by the city of Albany as a recording studio and as an event space where you could have weddings and that sort of thing. No alcohol license. We found out, and this was Valentine's morning, February 2010. We found out that this place opened in the fall of 2007. Immediately after it was open, they started to get complaints about underage drinking, teenage sex on the dance floor. It was adjacent to the Job Corps. These teenagers were coming back drunk, that sort of thing, so they were complaining to city commissioners in Albany. So code enforcement went in February of 2008 with Albany police and raided it. They found a fully stocked bar, a call list of beer and liquors, drugs, ecstasy, marijuana, cocaine. They found weapons. So code enforcement, it was run by a husband and wife. They called the husband and wife in, counseled them, and said, hey, you know, you all don't have an alcohol license, so you're not supposed to be selling alcohol. Okay. Well, the next month, they go back out with the Albany drug unit. They raid them again. Weapons, convicted felons. They arrested 2 people, including the husband, charged him with possession with intent to distribute marijuana. More ecstasy, more guns, more alcohol. So code enforcement then drew up a complaint to have the city commissioners revoke their business license in accordance with the established procedure. So when it came time for the hearing in June, they postponed it. And then the night of the hearing, they took it off again because they said that the DA asked them to stop because they wanted to do a big sting operation there. So they tabled it and left it alone. So from the summer of 2008 until this young man was killed, they had 42 calls to Brick City. They had 23 aggravated assaults. They had drug sales. They ran undercover agents in there to do drug sales. All of this activity at Brick City. They have people show up at the hospital. What happened to you? I got shot at Brick City. What happened to you? I got hit in the head with a crowbar at Brick City. What happened to you? I was leaving Brick City. Shots were fired at me, and this guy rammed our car out in the street. All of this at Brick City. All of this was known by the city of Albany, yet did nothing. They just kept running undercover agents in there. So, LaSheldon Stanford, this young man, he gets killed. In the meantime, each year Albany continues to issue a license for a recording studio. Okay? They continue to sell drugs, they continue to shoot, they continue to sell alcohol. 2 days before this young man was killed, they issued another license. 4 days after he was killed, they filed another complaint. 2 weeks after he's killed, they revoked the license and adopt this resolution about how they found this place to be a danger to the health, welfare, and safety of the community, and it needs to be shut down immediately.
How much was your verdict?
15 million overall, and they apportioned, they put 5% each on the husband and wife. They put 13% on the shooter and 1% on the other guys who were convicted of aggravated assault. They put 70% on the city of Albany. So the city of Albany is on the hook for 10.6 million. And we've got an argument in the Court of Appeals on Wednesday, because it will be the first time, if it stands, it will be the first time that a municipality has been held responsible for a nuisance that resulted in a death on private property. But our position is, as I told the jury in closing argument, you put a fox in the hen house and he kills the chicken. Don't blame the fox. He's just doing what foxes do. Put a pit bull in the backyard on the chain, and then you take him off the chain and open the gate, and he injures someone. Don't blame the pit bull. He's just doing what pit bulls do. Lawnmower won't crank without gas in it. Albany put the gas in the lawnmower. They created it. They helped maintain the nuisance. They are responsible for it.
Virgil, I'd say I think you're ready for your argument on Wednesday. And I have to say, I've mismanaged our time. And we've only got about 5 minutes for student questions. So if you can stick around for a few minutes afterwards and talk with students individually, but let's see what questions we have as a group here. I've skipped over the question where you get to give advice, and if they don't have questions, I'm going to have you do that. What questions do you all have for Mr. Adams? Yes, ma'am.
When you talk about the business of law, what would you recommend us to do to prepare for that? Is it accounting classes? Is it networking? What would you say?
Networking. Not so much accounting class. You can pay for that. But the networking and kind of the point about advice to you. One thing I took for granted, and that you may take for granted some too, but best advice I can give you is don't underestimate the relationships in this room. Because when you get out of practice, when you get out of law school, go into practice, there are going to be big firms, small firms, medium-sized firms that you all are going to be in. They're going to be judges here. And don't underestimate the relationships that you need to build and foster while you're in law school, because it will definitely serve you well when you get out in private practice. So many times, I run across people that I was in law school with, and I can call them and get information about judges, about certain localities, can you look at a jury list, that sort of thing, can you help me with this issue? Don't underestimate the relationships there, and you need to really, really pay attention to
other questions you have for Virgil this morning? All right, Virgil, thank you.
Thank you.